You can,
are we on?
start.
Oh, yes, we're on.
Yeah.
Very subtle. First of all, I didn't get a chance, and I don't think Nicole either, but we'd like to say thank you for this invitation and thank you for this excellent exhibition full of very provoking formats and statements and some of the notions that we're going to go through tonight. So we have the unenviable task, I'd say, to try to sift through 9 seemingly quite divergent and varied positions and try to arrive to perhaps some common themes or a thread of discussion. I'd also should add, I'm very grateful to pretty much everybody here for the English issue, which I understand is an issue for many, and for me is a manna from heaven. So thank you for that. Now, as a question to our large panel tonight, the big elephant in the room in this situation seems to be the relation to the famous previous generation, something that was very much at the forefront of the curatorial strategy. There are a number of words that have been very conspicuously missing from the presentations. Words like analogy, typology, even reference, concept, or it's used only as no concept, context, used no context, and also the disappearance of the object. So architecture does not exist, is where the views are. It's this disappearance of the object I find very intriguing and would be interesting to talk about. On the other hand, there were 2 terms that cropped up. They were a little bit like triggers. One was tectonics. You can't stay away from it. And the other was essence. The previous generation, all this formal reduction was a way of searching for an essence. And here, despite this pretty conscious attempt to construct a new position, a position of resistance perhaps to the inherited wisdom, still the need for this essence has arisen in some cases, not in all cases. So perhaps we could start with this. How do you deal with the idea that what you inherited from this previous generation was a method of design that was extremely successful because it made a lot of sense? You just take what's there and you work with what's there. You work with existing references and existing types, and you get hints from the context and you construct an object. So when all these things have gone, what do you do?
Yeah. So maybe because okay. We have to switch on.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. So maybe I'm the lucky one. I got this as a gift. I think that we showed also the Trockenturm as a picture. And I think for us it is really, really important to think about the material, the structure in architecture. And for me, the most impressing architecture is always the one that has a special sense. So it's like also such a word. But the meaning of the architecture, what is the need of this architecture, and how the materials represent this meaning. And so when you have the Trockenturm, and you have the structure and how it is built and also its height, you can look at it, and when you really go into it and into the topic, you can read it like a message. you can ask yourself, why was there the need for take the wood? Why is there the need for taking the bricks and all this? And so I think the architecture nowadays often has a lack of thinking like, in this direction. And when we try to make our contextual design or contextual architecture, we often tried also to ask these questions ourselves, and it's really difficult to get the answer which material or which size or structure would be the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I give it further.
Wir können uns ja streiten.
Okay. I completely agree with what you said. That there's it's very difficult to form an organic whole in architecture today because of these strange circumstances of construction laws and technology. We have accepted that wholeheartedly. We completely agree with that longing that you have, but we have chosen to abandon that in favor of an architecture that works through the eye, where things don't come together physically as a coherent system, but where they come together in the eye and they become architecture through the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Your partner.
Well, no, I just wanted to elaborate what Thomas says. Sorry. I mean, it's a fact that the most facades that we are building are made out of styrofoam. Mm-hmm. That's also quite different from the previous generation.
No, stop it. Nobody wants to build any out of styrofoam. Maybe you do it very, very elaborated. So you're maybe a good example. I've seen you and I heard you in a lecture once. I think you do it very well. But I think you were starting with a method. And maybe then we came back to this relationship between this construction and impression thing. Because I think we have not been taught in methods, not at all. Mm-hmm. I was unhappy about that because nobody told us how to do it and how to reflect our method. It was more like you go to the analogs and you start with a nice collage and you do a nice picture, and only this perspective is very nice. Maybe not from the frog perspective over the, the meadow, like the grass. It's very. Then it's more like Sahadit. But if you go up, it's more like Peri, something like that. And then you do a nice and very beautiful picture. And after a while, after 16 months, you decide, how can we construct this? I don't know. I don't have a clue. Maybe we do it in styrofoam. Or we do it in concrete slabs and we just precast it and put it in front. And I think this methodology is a thing we have to think about. How do we start? And also the other side, if you start to think about structures like, Keres does or Jyoti does. So you start the structure and you want to be more like, in a way, analytic, whatever, and you don't design. So you suppose that you're not designing at all. It's just kind of mathematics. I think that's the opposite to start. But I think you have to reflect how to start, or if you chose both ways, maybe you do, like I try too. I go to the one side and also to the other side from the picture and the construction, and I try to get one coherent thing. I think after a while, if you talk about stance, as I did, or intention, how can you say something is good or bad? And I think after a while you recognize it's about this coherence thing with your intention. Everybody agrees, huh? And I do, and I try.
I would agree with intention, not with coherence.
Okay, but to say if it's good or not, your intention has to be reflected also in the typology, in tectonics, and in let's say in topos. So where do you build? A hospital looks different to a kindergarten. You agree?
No.
Okay, so let me hear.
I agree with your notion of intention. I think it's fantastic, both in tectonics and the rest of architecture. But if you perceive the world as we do, as a fragmented, totally chaotic world, out of bonds, no typology, no rules, nothing is left, everything is exploded, and you try to find these scraps and put them together into architecture, into something that makes sense, then in a way, for us, this represents an architecture of truth.
Yes, but can you really say that there's nothing there? I think that you project your architecture against a very solid architectural background and urban background. So
I think that's the stance I'm thinking about, the perspective of your view. I don't think it's that important what he says, really. So your perspective, you know what I mean? I think we are very pluralistic, let's put it that way. So, I don't know, you go to Italy for having vacancies and holidays, another one goes to the desert, you come with your Fjällräven clothes, the other one with a nice beautiful jacket and I don't know, a tie, and everybody's different, but maybe some conventions are still around, and maybe this is, I don't know if I'm right, but maybe that's a kind of culture, but you can kind of correct me in that way. So nobody's naked in here, for example. So we have a kind of common culture and convention still we're talking about, and then we have different perspectives on that. And I think then we're talking about this different perspectives. And I'm just saying that you need to have this perspective and intention to build. Otherwise, you're lost. Then you're really lost. And you shouldn't build at all. But many do. That's the problem.
For me, it was really interesting to see that the last question about the vernacular architecture, it was really interesting to see that many architects showed pictures of old buildings with, out of stone, bricks, wood, etc. So they are really in a minimalism style. And for me, it's always the same feeling when I see a farmer's house or I enter it. It really touches me because I like the feeling there, the materials, I don't know if it's a right word in English, but it feels honest to me. And so, I don't know, today, for me, I know that those regions where the materials were used, they used it because they were the single materials they had. And I ask to myself if today we are really spoiled with materials, and if when you look at many architects and offices, they really use the materials like a tasting thing.
Well, again, this is not for me to answer. In fact, I'd be grateful if somebody else would be interested to jump in. But personally, I have a bit of a problem with this mythology of the still life of the peasant interior or the peasant exterior, for that matter. You know, and there's something almost troubling about the insistence on alpine pastures in the tower of images in the back room. There is. It could be construed and hopefully misconstrued as a stubborn preoccupation with the local culture and the nostalgia of an authenticity. But I also think it's very simply, in this case, a reaction to the word vernacular being in the question. So when you see vernacular, this is what you think that is asked of you. I think that if the word had been anonymity, the references in the back room would have been very different.
I just wanted to comment on the styrofoam architecture. I mean, I think this is just about your consciousness. It's about your ethic as an architect, if you want to build with styrofoam or not, but it doesn't interest anybody else. Mm-hmm. What interests me, not us, but me, are spaces and proportions and lines and images that I see. I will try to build without styrofoam, or we try to do it in that project that you see, but it's not a discourse. What we want to stress is that, I mean, this going back to this tower of Swiss infrastructure or or material romantic is just, for me, a proof of architects being insecure. And what do you do when you don't know which reference you should use or whatever? You look at the most robust, physical, stable thing that you find. And most of the time it's stone or concrete. So I have the feeling that's why so many architects, young architects, are fascinated by this, because this is stable, you cannot move it. No. But try to design space, to design facades, to design with plasticity, space, etc., without thinking of what's behind. Because this is your mind, his consciousness about ecology and whatever. I think it's another discourse.
I agree. I would say this insecurity pops up in every daily life. Like, you know, every Swisscom shop is like vintage design and going back to, how do you call it, the shovels and the things, and there's some grass on the floor, and it's also so shabby chic made. And I think this is a kind of a common sense. I think also after this, but that's my opinion, I think since 2008, I think that has also an impact on architecture. Maybe we don't recognize it that much, but I think it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask, maybe Stefan, your project is in Via Mala, Graubünden, gorgeous setup, and sort of the knee-jerk reaction could have been, let's do something that's contextual. So you would land into the land of stone or wood or shingles or any of these wallpaper materials that talk about tactility and authenticity. Instead, you chose the concrete, you chose the infrastructure material, the material of the road. Maybe you can tell us something about that?
Okay, first it was in wood. with a metal facade. Right. And then we had the assurance which said there are stone falling, so you have to do concrete. So that's kind of the cultural aspect of the building. But of course, I think in the essence of our idea, or it's all about, and that I would like to come back to the vernacular, is about possibilities. So we always questioned us, why are very old buildings good looking? Why we all have the feeling that it's great to be in there. And I really think it's about possibilities. And the nowadays problem in architecture, or the good thing in architecture, is that we have kind of positions to deal with possibilities, or lack of methods with deal possibilities, but at least we have something how we can come to a coherence in argumentations explaining the result we have at the end. The problem then in architecture is that we stopped thinking, and I think really the essence of architecture should be to start to think. Fortunately, I was not educated at ETH, so I can have a certain distance to ETH, and what I see is a discourse of the late 50s, early 60s, which we still have in under complexity, which came out in the autonomy of architecture, or in the question of picture, which is just mere of a position. It's okay for most of students to make average buildings, and at least there are then in the reality some of nice buildings because they follow the masters. But we have the real problem of possibilities, which we have to somehow react it. And the possibilities is not only a kind of one thing would be to opposite it with space. And this is then the second problem of the theory of architecture, which says architecture or space influences society, and that's why we always think with architecture everything can be solved. But in the reality...
It's not about solving problems, it's just about beauty.
I don't care, absolutely not in beauty. But to kind of translate this kind of ideas of architecture into reality, we have to be aware that there is someone, no architect acts by himself, so there needs to be someone which helps to make the idea, the thinking, the argue to reality. So I need a client, I need money, whatever. So this influences as well the result. And of course, then when a client comes and says, okay, I want this kind of facade, so what do? Do we say, no, I don't want this job? Or at least I try to work with these possibilities. So that could be a strategy. And I don't like foam, but I mean that sometimes you have to. Then you have to at least have a strategy. And I think then the essence is to think about what really matters and how to bring this in an argumentation which makes architecture understandable for architects. That's all the theory. Now I
don't know if I should answer, but I have an answer. You want to? Because I talk so much, but I think I tried to combine those two, inputs you gave, because I think I agree. If you talk about thinking, I think you talk also about taking care, or try to get like special solutions, and this gives also the link to those forming houses you told me. Like, if you don't have that much, then wood and stone, you have to think about it. How you deal with it, and how you take care of it, and how you put the ornament on it, and how you do it. So it's like in a way modest and honest and so on. And then you like this farming house. And I think then it's also correct to say all about what it's all about. It's about thinking. I think Caminada would say just the same thing when he thinks about his beams and girders, and he wants to make special joints because he don't want to buy this glue from the valley. He wants to make it on his own with his carpenters and so on, and then it gets special, and you see the treatment and the carefulness in a way. And I think then you have what you said, beauty. I think that's like when my child is drawing something very ugly, I think it's very beautiful. Because he was taking care, and it was made with love. And I think maybe it's a little bit romantic to say that, but a little bit it's about love.
But I have the same feeling with our buildings now. If somebody said it's really ugly, I'm very proud.
Okay. Stefan, in your presentation, you told the word politics, if I remember. And in the presentation of Martino, you spoke about tectonics. And for me, what is very interesting in your work, I'm not speaking about the work of Martino because he's coming from Ticino like me, and like me, speaking in English is not manna but stone from heaven. But I think that your recomposition is also a very strong political statement, because with this very simple gesture, you bring the stone, you put inside, and you redefine a space, which is a public space, as you've seen. You as you said, you are also saying that this tradition is dead, no nostalgia. We have to accept it's nothing to do with idillio or something, no? And it is very effective as a strategy. You reconstruct a space, and you have a political statement. And in some sense, it's something that also reacts to a statement by Luigi Snozzi, no? If I remind you, that a good project is a project that finds out one question or one answer that is an answer to a lot of questions, like in your project. And today, in our complexity, it is possible to work with such an approach and to have a political statement through the building, not through a discourse or through writings, but through the building itself. Morti tutti.
I see.
Yes, I do agree that it is a political statement, and I have to say that it is a second effect somehow, you know, but a conscious effect as well. I really agree with him. Sorry, I don't remember the name. You.
Lando Rosmeier.
The crucial question is still, even if it's maybe out of fashion, it's still coherence. I think in this world there are so many, you know, influences that, for me personally, it's just impossible to deal with, you know, all of them and have the face to say this is the answer or this could be the answer. You know? So I really think that going through a coherent process, trying to find right solutions, you know, even, you know, these are all words a bit strange nowadays, but it's still the only thing we have, you know, still with the only thing we have. The difference is that now the context is much more complex, so the work it's much more difficult if you want, but still you have to try to solve and to do what you're doing with some kind of, you know, of coherence. And personally, I find complexity and, you know, these words a sort of, you know, alibi, you know. You know, if you have a kind of come si dice, una buona dialettica, no? You know, you can really, you know, play with words and then go wherever you want. If you stick to the discipline and which is our discipline, you know, architecture, you maybe find, you know, some solutions that you didn't imagine, you know, before. And sorry, this is, you know, I take it a longer turn to arrive to the recompositions. I just did it, you know, with this in mind, you know, and of course I had the opportunity to do it because I know these places, you know, and if somebody is born in those places, will probably deal with huts and, you know, and pastures, and if somebody is born in Basel or Zurich, will probably have other problems and will deal with, you know, facades and, you know, urban space in terms of street and squares, but I don't see, you know, a problem with these two positions. I mean, it's just existing both.
Okay.
Yes, hi, it's me again. I'm also fond of your project, by the way. I don't remember your name either, but yes, you. It's a very nice project. But I also think it brings us to maybe a question or something to discuss is sort of tectonics. I think you mentioned it also, but also courage. So I think in the bigger picture of the architectural world, the Swiss kind of manage the tectonics, so I think we shouldn't be worried too much about it. I mean, you know, if we put things in comparison, we know how to build. We shouldn't be so afraid of Kohlhoff. I think it's fine. We'll somehow manage to discuss and bring out tectonics. But I think courage is actually a much more kind of recent or a current problem or a topic. If in Switzerland we can do everything we want to do, as one of the participants was mentioning, Manuel, so can't we invest a bit more in courage? You know, you do see that actually we keep looking back. I find also a lot of Alpine references or old references troubling. So what's kind of the next move? You know, on one hand, with competitions, we're being sort of brought to one sort of standard level. We can't kind of show our courage because we might not get the project. On the other hand, we have the politics, our role as actors, and our responsibility, I think, to the society, not just to beauty, as someone mentioned. So I think we should kind of also discuss that, a bigger kind of topic. I know it's really big, sorry.
I guess I have to, because you were picking up on a term that I used, I have to react, and I also have to say that I kind of agree. I think we were speaking a little bit about problems, the Zurich problems, the Basel problems, but we also have to acknowledge that these problems are so minuscule, so minute, so irrelevant in a way. They're not problems. No, we're speaking from such an incredibly privileged position. Switzerland as the most stable country on this planet, as the richest country on this planet, as the country with the best resources, with the best everything. And then you sometimes think, what do we do as architects? We invest our time in inventing the most beautiful window details. That's fantastic. But you think, like, what a fucking waste of time, of resources, of opportunities, of work, of hours. And couldn't we invest this into more, I quote Mrs. Rabaran, courageous endeavors? I don't know, that maybe solve problems, maybe create new problems. Maybe it's funner to create new problems. Maybe it is a little bit too stable here. Yes, I totally agree with you. We fall in love with these stupid bucolic kind of mountain huts that are romanticizing something that we've never had. I don't know, don't we have the problem that we have too few problems and that we have therefore become very sleepy in hardly daring to step out of this little cozy bubble and engaging ourselves with a society that is a little bit more conflictual, more problematic than we like to admit?
Absolutely. I think one of the problems that people who write about architecture always complain about is, we can't be critical. I can't criticize this building because all of a sudden I get death threats in the post, or I'm not like that, but certainly I'm professionally ostracized. So there is this, the courage question can lead to the idea of a constructive critique as a basis for dialogue, perhaps being a little bit less polite and political. It's also a question of, in this closed bubble in which you're sort of in different parts of the food chain. You're a member of a jury one day, you're a participant in the jury the next, in the competition the next. It's very difficult to step on people's shoes and to elbow to create a position.
No, but I mean, courage, you can talk about big gesture, but I don't think it's very interesting. You should show courage on everyday basis, in your everyday action and in your range of possibilities. So it means if you can put up valuable piece of architecture inside the city, like you did, this is courage on every day.
What do you mean exactly, precisely? Can you give an example of this courage?
About courage? Just to...
One of these everyday actions that signifies courage.
To fight for the project you've designed on every level, economical level, on the materiality, on the social level, that it should be done like you thought it. And how you thought it is related to your conscience. If you don't want to build it with foam, or if you want it to build it for the people or whatever in a democratic way, that's your choice. But it's in order to bring your idea, your formal idea, to a realization, you need to show everyday courage. Otherwise you just don't build, or you build shit.
You need courage, but you also need a bit of reflection, perhaps. There is something that you said at the beginning that your first position when you set up in practice, and here you are in your room and you think, okay, the phone's not ringing yet. This is an extremely productive situation, actually, and perhaps one of these problems in this privileged culture is that there is not enough time for reflection. There are too quickly, perhaps, I see a lot of heads here moving, but let's say compared to Britain in the 80s, or even compared to Switzerland in the early 90s, when people were forced to create an intellectual position and to write because there wasn't so much they could do. And now there are, even though there are people thinking that it's difficult, and of course it's difficult because there are so many architects and only this many jobs, compared to other countries, it's a situation where there are many competitions and many opportunities to get commissions, and we have to acknowledge that.
I'm sorry. Maybe I want to mention, because for me, we are both from Austria, and I also were always working beside my studies. And when I was there, I really was in the position of a practicant, but really was always respected like a full architect. I really had the feeling to be in the project. I attended at Sitzungen, I don't know in English, meetings, and I had the possibilities to go to the building site, etc. And I got so affected to this job of an architect. I was really impressed, and I really knew, okay, it feels completely right, I have to do this. And afterwards, we moved to Switzerland, and yeah, I really felt depressed because it's such a rich country, and I had the feeling, because I really tried different kind of offices, but I always had to draw in variations, and it was really depressing. And I asked myself, the whole money, is it just put it into drawing in variations? For sure, variations are important to try what could be the best possibility, but I don't know.
Ultimately, in the competition, you don't have to have a position, yes?
Can I react to your point? And I must say I disagree. I think if we try to convince our client to use, I don't know, concrete, and we fight for the concrete instead of some other stuff, this is not an act of courage. This is just our everyday labor. This is our bread and butter. I think an act of courage is really to go against conventions, to go something. I don't know, that also creates maybe a scandal, a conflict, brings in a paradigm shift. And what for? For the society. Because I think in the end, what is architecture is also about beauty. It's all about everything that has been said, but in the end, we are the most social of the arts. We are the most political of the arts. We have to serve a society, and the better, the greater, the better. The bigger the society that we serve, the better. This is our task. And if we can somehow emancipate them, somehow bring them a certain kind of potential of emancipation, maybe through a little bit of a scandal, then that's an act of courage.
Yay!
So I would also like to ask a question about the discussion, because all the discussions are around architecture production in Switzerland, which only makes sense in relation to architecture production outside Switzerland. And so how do we deal with the dilemma, or is maybe a dilemma, or is maybe a paradox, Swiss compared to non-Swiss? Do we want to preserve the Swissness, or are we afraid of the globalization? How do we use this kind of conflict between being Swiss and the disappearing of the Swissness? I mean, it's the same as many mention as architecture as autonomous, but at the same time, it's also in relation with the context. It's also in relation with history. It's working without a reference. We want to create something new, but also with reference. How do we use this paradox with the opposition as a productive force?
I worked for a visualization office for over 4 or 5 years, working for many architects in Switzerland, and I kind of made the experience you were talking about, that I think there is some kind of
fear.
Some kind of fear maybe in Switzerland to be part of this globalization or this acts that go on worldwide. And I made the experience that over the years there is kind of a retro act taking place, where architects tend to go back 30, 40 years to their childhood and remember the homes of the families, the plaster and all the elements and materials, and kind of build up their memories in a style of new architecture. So it's kind of an image of retro, which is produced and reproduced in this discourse. So I kind of make 5 images that look, with buildings that look the same from 5 different architects. So there's the question: is this common sense? Is this something which we can appreciate? That there is some style or some Gemeinschaftlichkeit, some collective thinking going on, or is this something which is dangerous because it's not thinking forward, it's not confronting, it's not working with the zeitgeist? That's something which I would throw in around. I don't know. It's my experience.
Stefan?
Thank you. This is a typical discussion we have in Switzerland, and it's a typical discussion which shows exactly that we are trapped in discipline. And that's as well. There was a notion, and this is one of my love topics, that we say that we have to show courage and we have to make the right architecture to solve problem, to have a statement, and the object of architecture is kind of the political aspect of architecture. Of course, this is true. And this is one aspect. That's the thing we all would love, to make great buildings which change everything. So, but I once read in a newspaper about a building in Grono by Raphael Zuber, which said, I think it was Stalder or Ursprung, I don't know, the only value of architecture is in the value itself. And this is kind of, if you say that's the value to the society, the architecture, the space by itself, this is nice, but it's not enough. And this is exactly what I mean by political. And I mean not the architecture should be political. Architect is just a dead thing. The politics should be political. And it's not enough to spend all the money, the time in competitions and try to make the best buildings. It has to be about courage in the everyday life, and that's exactly, as at least I think, what Manuel Herz said, that it's so enriched, the discipline. It's about thinking, it's about seeing things together, it's about having a clear state, and it's about working and being part of the discussion in the everyday life. I do think that we have some problems in Switzerland we should solve, and I personally think as well, Switzerland is a culture which I maybe understand a little bit, so I can make here most than going somewhere else, but this is a possible position. I really appreciate that I think you do research in Egypt, somewhere, or in these regions, which is very, very necessary. And there are offices like Benze Konloshi and Sofia Glatz with refugees, architecture for refugees. It's not about building, it's about being engaged in society, trying to, within or outside Switzerland, to do something. And it's not, it's great to build, but architecture can be much more. And we have to go out of this idea of autonomy of architecture. We has to be a part as a human being into the society with the background of architecture, and that will help much more.
I completely agree and completely disagree at the same time. I think architecture needs a great degree of autonomy to be itself, to be powerful in society, to be powerful in the city. And I think, to answer to your question, for us, our experience is that in recent years, we have found friends who share similar preoccupations about our profession in different countries in Europe. So there is an exchange going on. And I think, for example, the questions that occur on the fringes of our metropolitan areas, where the landscape and the city, they somehow mix. Those questions can be somehow different, but they're also very similar in Flanders and in the agglomeration of Switzerland, in England and in other parts of the developed world. So in a way, we found friends that are exactly working on the same things in different places in the world. And there is a network. And it's not, I don't think it's a contradiction, Stefan, to what you said, because these same people, they are not advocating a unified, uniform, globalized, flattened world. They are they're advocating a world of the specific, of the richness of the experience. No? And if we have wonderful discussions with people from the Netherlands with whom you would completely agree in terms of sensitivity of architecture. And I think that's wonderful. So globalization is a chance as well as a curse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I say I have a certain idea of a culture of Switzerland, I mean, I worked in Netherlands and I mean Germany, and I mean Europe is not I mean, where we have the democratic and all these things. I mean, that's not so different. So I can imagine that we find all over almost same surroundings friends, but I mean there are totally different conditions in totally different countries. I mean, if I say we have to be courage, of course, it's always with the background as an architect. So, I mean, we are all taught in architecture. So I would say since 100 years we exactly know how to build a great and city and architecture. We have exactly. You can in the bibliotheks, in the books, you can find thousands of examples of ideal city. We have no idea how to translate these kind of ideas into reality. Okay, yeah. That's the problem.
We have a reaction. I'm sorry to interrupt this really interesting discussion. I do have a reaction about the politics and the relevance of architecture, and especially of the professionals of architecture. I am questioning this podium with 12 male architects and 1 female architect. I'm really, for me, it is not the question of politics of architecture, but as well the question of politics of the profession of architecture.
Well, it's only women who ask the questions tonight.
That's true. And I did not count you because I thought you're...
Yes, it's true. I think there was something I saw recently. I'm never going to take part in a panel in which they are all male or the woman is moderator. That's also a problem.
Yeah, but there's no answer an architect can give on that question, I think.
That's true.
A citizen can. And we as citizens, we are all citizens, so we have to give an answer to that question. Mm-hmm. But us as architects, we don't have to, and we shouldn't even try.
No, but me as...
Because we don't have the skills to answer to that question. And there are specialists that develop a lot of answers, and I think we could follow. And we have our own...
Sorry, which question? You have no skills to answer which question?
The question about why we are all men here, and the question about the... Yeah, I don't know. It's just not what we are. We could talk about as architects.
We can talk about this. I mean, it's quite easy. It's about doing things. I mean, it's about doing a female that they should stand up and say we leave this organization. It's we don't
as citizens, but not as architects.
As well as architects. I mean, it's the same. And I can tell you to come here, and I go there, and then we have at least one position changed. So I invite you to come here. So that's very easy. I mean, we have not to speak about. We have to do something.
Some other volunteers? So I did not want to have one male less, but I wanted to have one female more. Good.
But the discussion should continue.
No, just a comment on the political engagement. I had the feeling at some point that to hear spoiled kids missing adrenaline, I think you should just engage on your everyday life, which what you can touch and what you can change means the people you're in contact with, by the administration, your clients, the construction firms, everybody that you touch, that you're in contact with, you should try to get or convince to ethics, sustainable building, if we can use that word, a better world together, whatever you would call it. Okay, for me, that's a no-brainer. If you don't do this, you shouldn't be exercising this job. So that's not the topic of the discussion, please. You should do your job the best you can do it with the more ethic you can do. Then if you choose to act here in Switzerland, that's a choice, that's a certain context and a certain condition. If you choose to act in a European condition, it's other rules. If you choose to act overseas, it's other rules. Fine with you.
What?
Fine with me.
A wise man told me once, you should get better in which you're good and not try to get better in which you're bad. So I think maybe this could help for the discussion, because I think if you talk about globalization and about being bored by those vernacular alpine hats and so on, you can be bored. But I think you just should see it as I don't know, it's kind of a trying that you try to find your own kind of specific identity within this globalization world, whatever. I heard once that, I don't know, 30 years ago, it was just common to buy your shoes in Milano. So the best shoes you got in Milano, that's gone. So you buy your shoes here, whatever. And the best suit you got in London, whatever. And I think so everybody had his specific qualities, and I think it's worth to think about it. What are your qualities? And maybe you can develop that. And that's my answer. Maybe somebody has another one. But I think that's the best answer I have to this globalization thing. Improve your, like, again, as a child, with the child thing, because I have a kid, then you see, you want him maybe to play football, but he wants to do ballet, and he behaves different than you thought. What do? Just let him behave like he wants to. So let him be what he wants to be and what he's best in. I think that's my choice, at least.
I kind of totally agree, but I get very itchy when this is connected to territory, when this gets connected to a nation, or when this gets connected to a locale. Of course, I mean, but in a sense, what you just said is total common sense. It's not something extraordinary. Of course, everybody should excel in what they're doing and fulfill their dreams and so on. Think about their identity and their character and blah, blah, blah. Of course, I totally agree. But when this gets rooted, and maybe this is a little bit also what we are kind of struggling with in this context of the exhibition, because it puts as a label Switzerland, then it becomes uncanny a bit. There's something wonderful in all of the Swiss people around here who feel this kind of rootedness and who feel this connectedness. But for everybody else, it's a little bit frustrating. No? Then I don't know, what should I do? I was born in Germany. I have a Swedish father. I have an Israeli mother. I was educated in England and lived in India. What should I relate to? I don't have an identity. I give a fuck about identity. I'm not so interested in that, or this kind of rootedness. This, I don't know, as soon as it gets too much connected to a locale, it becomes unsympathetic a little bit.
Of course, but I totally agree in a way, because I can't give the same answer like you, because I was rooted totally different. So, as I said before, I think if you have your intentions and your way to do architecture, I think that's just great. I think that's, I don't think that we have much more. It's just like, that's all what we have in a way. We have those different people and everybody's acting another way and everybody tries to do it like the best. I don't know.
Yes, and we do it all in the context of a profession that is completely, that has been kind of globalized for the past 2,000 years. Huh? So this building that we are now inside is not a Swiss building. Of course, it was built in Switzerland by Swiss workmen, but its idea comes as much from Berlin as it comes from Paris of the 19th century. Mm-hmm. it's hugely adapted to the 19th century urban culture of Europe. Huh? Maybe it has a Swiss accent, its size, its proportions, and so on. But that's what we should be interested in. We should be interested in how ideas travel, how the best ideas travel. Why should we? Why? If we like a Mexican novel, and we're inspired by it, why should we not be inspired by influences from outside that we find strong and invigorating and inspiring? And I think that's so important about it. I mean, the idea of, I agree with you, well, what you said, Manuel, the national state is 150 years old. Huh? And I don't think it's the strongest model we have at the moment. And you, Luca, you're dealing with the export of Ticinese talent, both to the south of the border and to Russia. Huh? That was an early example of globalization, no? Of ideas that travel, and I think that's wonderful. And we should. I think that should be the future. And I think the ownership of architectural ideas and culture is really global. If you take an idea from somewhere, it becomes your own. You know, there's no copyright.
But I think that if I look to your curriculum, to CV, your formation, this is very interesting because most of you are very, very multi-layered formation. As someone came from Austria, then is working in Zurich, and it's even more complicated and rich than in the past, in those past. And this is a condition, and it's, for me, it's an interesting condition. No, to have this strong, this multiple identities, perhaps, no, and perhaps is also something that changes our strategies, design strategies, or not. I would be interested to your reaction.
You talked about that let's say the interconnectedness of ideas and inspiration is already here, right? That's how I understood. So what do you think if the restriction wouldn't have been you need to choose projects from Switzerland? Do you think, because we're still Swiss architects, do you think there would have been a totally colorful mixture of international references, or do you think you would still have seen a lot of alpine huts in the...
It would have been a big mix of references. Because I think we are, in most parts, we are architects, we deal with an urban culture, even if it's in the countryside. Huh? It's an urban culture that we all live in, even if we are just, among a few inhabitants of a valley, because we are only 30 minutes away by car, from the next airport. Huh? So I think it's about acknowledging that urban culture and that participation in the urban culture. And in that context, for me, the narrative that we see in the last room of the Alpine culture is just a very partial truth. It's a truth that should be respected, no, but it's a partial truth.
But I think the funny thing is, because the discussion seems to be like everybody tries to find a position towards or against what we see there, but I think it's also quite interesting to just see that it is there, I mean, there's a lot of alpine huts. Maybe it would be very interesting to see why are there so many alpine huts. Yeah. Because actually, the funny thing is, I could also find like a contrary explanation that it's also like a reaction to the globalization and the like instableness of maybe the national boundary or the national identity, and that this is sort of a nostalgic re-reference to the roots or something, that is very contemporary and is maybe a result of globalization.
Also this point, because she's our newest panel member.
I think it's in architecture. Maybe it's like just in food. If I eat something with rice and chili and maybe soya sauce or noodles or something, I just taste it's Asiatic. I don't know where it's from. But if I taste something from Switzerland, I know if it is Berner Rösti or Zurich Schnetzelt. I know those things more, and I really can. So of course, most of my references are from Switzerland because I just know them. You know what I
Because
mean?
you grew up here.
Yeah, because I grew up
I have
here
no
and
idea
I
what
was
I'm
educated here, and it is my context, and I know all those things. And I could not take an Asiatic temple as a reference because maybe I know it, but not as well as I know the Swiss context.
What I found striking about the last room, the amount of mountain cabins, is that there was no story being told between all the three images. The only connection seemed to be a nice atmosphere, like a cabin in the woods or in the mountains. It's nice to see, it's a nice picture, but it was nothing more than that. And there were only a few officers who actually achieved to make connection. I think Müller-Siggers was one of them, was really, really strong in showing a viaduct, the Kalkbreit, and a large factory, like showing the great machine with or without people. And but most of the architects, it was just an atmospheric connection and not a story, not a strategy being told. That's what I really missed in the last room. And for me, it's not about the Swiss identity. I'm not from Switzerland. I'm from Belgium. For me, when I talk about identities, it's about the identity of a building, and a building can have multiple identities. You can choose which one you make the dominant one. And if you're giving a building a specific identity, you can ask yourself the question, does my building own parts of the identities of the surrounding buildings? Can I assimilate with them? Can I blend in, or do I not blend in? That's for me more talking about identity, not about the person, because the person for me is maybe 1% of the building is a person, because as an architect, when I want to build something, it's about doing the correct gesture. It's like, for example, if I shake hands with you, I don't know you, or I shake hands with the king, or I shake hands with my boss, well, that's me. But you do it all in an appropriate way. You have a way of saying hello to this or that person, and the same thing you do with the building. No, I kind of lost my thread.
But then don't you get to this position that David explained that I find really interesting, this idea that you do 5 renderings for 5 different offices, perhaps for the same competition. That would be interesting. And they all look the same?
Well, I think that's interesting. I mean, I think it's well discussed, if I understand it right, that it seems that we are having less and less styles of architecture. And that's true. I mean, if you look at the current architectural competition scene, sometimes I can't even tell a difference if I have seen it or haven't seen it before. It's all starting to look more and more alike. And I don't think that's a very good thing to get rid of this diversity, because let's compare it with, if you ask a biologist and you say to him, well, let's kill all the species in this world and leave 10 behind, he will say, well, it's impossible, there's no world anymore. And the same thing maybe might be happening in architecture. We're losing a lot of diversity. Complex in architecture, things are looking more and more the same. Which is also kind of an insult, leaving all complexity to humanity, because it's like as if people cannot understand complex buildings anymore.
Am I allowed to react from the audience?
Yes, please.
So, I mean, this is kind of a hoax of architecture as well, that buildings have an identity. I mean, identity needs reflections and kind of self-understanding, and only people can have identities. So building has kind of Identitätsstiften, which mean is related to person perceiving buildings, which has a certain specific influence of the person. So architecture for itself has not an identity. And if we say that kind of this building is influenced by, as you said, 19th century, of course it's true. If we look at the certain under complexity of architecture, if we see on the proportions, on the kind of measurements and so on, about of the representations of the state of this time, understanding of kind of power and so on. But if we really, and I mean, you have to know, I'm in the part I'm an architect, and in the other part I'm a scientist. And if you really would look what is very specific on this building, of course there are global influences and there's globalization, but it's as well very specific influences that form this building. The obvious one is topography. The other thing is the material you have around here. The third thing is to have the handcraft, which is specific in Basel. So I would say it's if we would like to know take this kind of local thing. Every building is highly specific. Even it's kind of obvious that there are global things in it. And this, I would say, makes it there are no similar buildings on world. Everyone is very specific, and as well to the kind of metaphor of food. If you say Chinese food in Switzerland has nothing to do with the food in Chinese. I mean, it's typical Swiss. Even the rice is from Italian. I mean that's exactly what is the problem. And I totally disagree that we have a kind of a kind of a total flattening of architecture is very specific if you really look very narrow into the production of architecture. And that's all the things we all days forget in the practice of architecture. We have discussions about classicism and even Greek temples and so on. But I mean, we always forget that every architecture, if it becomes physical, is extremely related to a specific solution and specific location, and that we should not forget. Just to summarize.
Yeah, I want to continue at this point because it was already at the beginning of the discussion of this question, and I asked to myself, because there is, for me it seems like there is on the one hand the fear of globalization, and the other one we all have to say yes, we're for sure we want the globalization, but all in all, for me it makes it interesting to have the global influences, but the city or the location itself, when it's getting also influenced by the local style or the identity, the question for identity, why does it look like this at this location? Yeah, it makes it interesting for me, because on the other hand, if we just would think global, everywhere it would be completely the same.
Perhaps we should wrap it up. One more statement.
I do really agree that we should be specific about how you build. That means that the building is tied to the place where it is, and it can only be understood with its context. If you look at it in an isolated way, it loses all meaning. I agree with that, but globalization, I think, as Thomas said before, one of you people there, it happened in architecture 200 years ago. I mean, in 1800 the world was practically empty. There were few cabins and huts and stuff, and some buildings, of course, but from that point, the following 150 years, almost everything in Europe, at least, most things have been built, the most part, and it's all neoclassicism. And that way, yeah, you can be specific, but if you build a classicist building here or in Italy, you're always going to be specific because the same elements keep coming back in all Europe.
Well, perhaps just to wrap it up, for the purposes of the evening, we've had a very I have to say, a very tidy semicircle here. It's and in the other previous events, it looked like all the people were piled up in the center here, looking tired, and which has its own charm, I have to say. We've had a very well-behaved, sort of thoughtful set of ideas put forward. We failed dismally to reach a unitary conclusion, which gives us hope. So I'd like to thank you all for your thought and your carefulness, and for the work you put into your architecture and in tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina, for putting that so nicely. Thank you very much, Nicola, also for your moderation, and all of the panelists. I know that this is a very experimental format. This is on purpose also. We're trying to push the boundaries of what a panel discussion means, and there may be some frustration. Some of you only got to say a couple of sentences. I hope that we can all meet again outside and have another couple of drinks and maybe get those points across from one person to the other. I wanted to react to one more thing that was mentioned, and I think it was brought to our attention tonight again and previously by some very enthusiastic female architects who we value a lot. And it is true, you see mainly male panel here that is not representative of our exhibition. We have, of the participating architects, more than 40% have at least one woman in the head etage of the architecture firm. So we're very happy that actually in our exhibition we're going towards a more equal gender situation in architecture. It is, but we're very grateful that it was brought to our attention. It was something we did not pay explicit attention to in our planning, and that will definitely go into our future planning.